Hello, my name's Clare and I'm from Emmanuel, and today we're looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 1 to 12. Now the section which really grabbed my attention was verses 4 to 6, which I'm just going to read to you again. It says, "The God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants, for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." Paul's writing about the light of the gospel, and this is something right out of his personal experience, having had that Damascene conversion. And that story is a good backdrop to try and understand what Paul is saying here. First, he talks about the God of this world blinding unbelievers. Now that's Satan's work, keeping unbelievers from knowing the truth about who Jesus is. And that was Paul's experience. He couldn't see that Jesus was the Son of God, and he was actively persecuting those who believed. And then into Paul's spiritual darkness in Acts, it says in chapter 9, "Suddenly a light shone." And this theme of light shining into darkness is one which begins in Genesis chapter 1, and it repeats in the reference to creation here. God says, "Let light shine out of darkness." And likewise, in the Gospel of John, he starts his Gospel sounding like Genesis. It says, "In the beginning," and he goes on to give this reference to light, and he's talking about Jesus. He says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Paul's experience was just this. God's light shone into his darkness, and it was the light shining that illuminated the truth for him. The light of the gospel overcomes the darkness and is more powerful than Satan's schemes to keep us unbelieving. Next, the light brings revelation. Paul, on seeing the light and hearing the voice calling his name, he cries out, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice replies, "I am Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus himself in John chapter 8 says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Paul, in his conversion experience, begins to follow Jesus. He is physically blind, which is kind of a helpful illustration because he becomes utterly dependent on this voice calling him and leading him out of darkness and into the light. And as he's given his spiritual sight, then his physical sight is also restored. These verses are a description of how Jesus is the way to knowing the Father. Jesus in John chapter 14 says, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." And again, Paul in Colossians, he says, Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God. So what can we take from this passage today? If you're still trying to work out the gospel, this passage is really good news because it shows us that we can ask Jesus to reveal God the Father to us in the same way that Paul cried out, "Who are you, Lord?" You can pray a very simple prayer to ask God to reveal himself to you. And secondly, as believers, this is exciting because as we follow Jesus, the promise is that we will have the light of life and know the glory of God through the face of Jesus Christ. So let me encourage you, spend time looking at what Jesus is like in the Gospels. He's full of truth and grace, full of compassion, patient, kind, good, and let that knowledge increase and shape your knowledge of what God is like. Have a good day.